I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight, this afternoon, to our panel entitled Faces of Homeless Women, sponsored by the William J. Hughes Center for Public Policy and the Atlantic County Commission on Women. My name is Lori Vermeulen. I'm the chair of the Atlantic County Advisory Commission on Women. I want to tell you just a little bit about our organization. I'm going to read a little bit from our mission statement. Our mission is in part to serve as a fact-finding and advisory commission to the public at large, the county executive, and the board of commissioners by studying the needs, problems, interests, concerns, and capabilities of the women who reside, work, and visit Atlantic County. And it was with this mission in mind that we approached the Hughes Center and asked if we could collaborate, because they have a very similar mission in mind, right? They hold public forums, provide opportunities for debate and discussion of important issues, and we thought we could work together on this project. So I'd like to thank John Frugen and the Hughes Center, their excellent staff, for working with us on this panel. And we hope there'll be more partnerships and things we can do together to come. I would also like to thank our panel, and John will be introducing them, but I wanted to thank you for coming out and having this conversation. And I just wanted to promise you that there would be some follow-up, that our commission will report to the Board of County Commissioners about what we learned tonight and think about what next steps we can do. So thank you all for coming. And just one last thing. Our commission does have a few vacancies, so if there's anyone who's interested in working toward issues facing women, just give us a holler. We'd be happy to talk with you. With that, I'll have John Frugen take over and start our panel discussion. Thank you.
Welcome to everyone who is here, and welcome to those of you who are watching online. As you just heard, I'm John Frugen at the Hughes Center, and part of the mission of the Hughes Center is to inform the South Jersey community about issues of importance. And so we are very pleased to partner with the Commission on Women to bring you this program on a very important topic. And let me say welcome to our distinguished panel and allow me to introduce them. To your far left is Kay Petrecka, Community and Government Relations Representative at the Atlantic City Rescue Mission, where Kay has worked since 1990. Her service there has included evening counselor for the Family Life Center, case management in the Single Women's Ministry, and street outreach. So welcome, Kay. Thank you.
Thank you.
To her left, Christine Zoda Agizi provides services for the homeless through Jewish Family Services. She oversees all aspects of the agency's Atlantic Homeless Alliance and Justice Involved Services, as well as Jewish Family Services projects for the assistance in transition from homeless. So let's welcome Christine. Claudia Ratzlaff is Chief Executive Officer of Avanzar, formerly the Women's Center. She began with the program in 1984 as a helping professional and served as its first outreach counselor for victims of domestic violence. She became program director in 1992, associate director in 2000, and was named Chief Executive Officer in 2002. Thank you for being here, Claudia. And John McLernan recently retired as Director of Social Services and Community Relations for the Atlantic County Department of Family and Community Development. He had a 36-year career with Atlantic County government. His career of working with homelessness has been recognized repeatedly, including being named Social Worker of the Year in New Jersey in 2012. He continues to work in his mental health practice in Northfield. Welcome, John. Thanks for being here. Disappointingly, we were to have a client of the rescue mission, Helene Nathan, be with us today, and Helene became sick today and was unable to make it, so we'll miss her presence. As we begin, we have asked each of our panelists to speak for about 5 minutes about their perspective on homelessness and about their organization's work. So there are index cards and pencils on the seats, and we have helpers in the back who have more of them if we need them. As we go through the program, jot down your questions for this panel. The cards will be collected, and we will save some time for the end for your questions. I will tell you, my eyesight is really bad, so please write clearly and write large. Thank you. So let's start with our opening remarks, and we'll start with Kay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us and bringing this important subject to light. Some history. There have been 2 rescue missions in Atlantic City. For the first one opened in 1915 and closed in the early 1940s. The second was established in 1964 and continues today. Both were opened with the same spiritual and societal purposes in mind, and both of the rescue missions were initially open to serve men. In fact, our present facility, which opened in 1989, was built with a dormitory and program bedrooms for men and a family life center for moms with children, but there didn't appear to be a thought that there would be the need to provide shelter for individual women. It was not until a couple years later that the reality proved relevant and our single women's ministry was birthed. The numbers since then have just continually grown. So my thoughts, who are these women? Where did they come from? What factors contributed to their homeless situations? And how do we help them? When I was asked to participate in this panel, after freaking out about having to condense 30 years at the rescue mission into 5 minutes, I decided to take a look at some statistics. The rescue mission utilizes a homeless management information system called Awards, and each client's intake goes into that system since 2013. So having run numerous reports, this is what I found. Of the 9,200 people registered as having received shelter with us, 2,600 of them were women, and that's where most of their similarities end. Their ages ranged from 18 to 86, and their situations were just as varied. Although substance use disorders, untreated mental health conditions, or economic factors may have contributed to their situation, the overwhelming answer to the question of what caused your homelessness were relational issues, such as asked to leave a shared residence, the death of a loved one, the breakup of a family, or domestic violence. When as a child, the people given responsible to care for her weren't able to protect her from harm, or worse, directly harmed her, who does she trust? When the love of her life turns and terrorizes her, who does she trust? When the person she relied on most in the world dies, who does she trust? When her family or closest friends kick her out of their house, who does she trust? Who does she trust when her closest relationships have been severed? For those who run out of options, where do they go? This is where we enter their story. You or I in the business of social services may be the next relationship that this woman has. If we fail, she might give up trying. If she could manage these things on her own, she likely would not be showing up at my desk. Yes, she may need to be connected with a source of income or insurance or treatment for substance use or mental health issues, but the first thing she needs is a relationship that she can trust to help her. So then what must we do to gain the trust of someone who's mistrustful and hurting? In my 30-plus years in this field, this is what I've tried to follow. 1, I must have this person's best interest in mind. Not there to be a hero, to bolster my reputation, or to gain some advancement. It's about her. 2, I must be able to do what I say I will do. I can't make promises that I can't keep, and I have to follow through with what I say. 3, I must be trustworthy. I can't exploit these ladies, and I can't share their personal information without their consent. 4, I must know what I'm doing. I have to do my homework. I have to find out what agencies or programs can provide what this person needs, and then I have to make a relationship with these individuals so that we can follow through together to help them. So how does the Atlantic City Rescue Mission respond to this need? How do they make a difference? This is our mission statement. The Atlantic City Rescue Mission is set apart by the Spirit of God to preach the gospel and meet the physical, emotional, and other basic needs through the provision of clothing, shelter, food, counseling, referral, and structured programs of the poor and those who are bound and bruised by addictive lifestyles in Atlantic City and the surrounding communities. Our scripture for that is Luke 4, verses 18 and 19. We offer prayer to those who come to us. We have chapel services twice a day. Mind you, attending chapel is not mandatory for someone to come to us to receive shelter or food, but it's offered, and it's open to anyone longing for a relationship that won't fail them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay, for that excellent start to our discussion. Christine, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Kai. I just want to take a second and say thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. JFS and Atlantic Homeless Alliance are a great resource for anybody experiencing homelessness in the county, so I'm very excited to be here. I wanted to start by kind of talking about the categories of individuals that are experiencing homelessness. You know, we have individuals that are chronically experiencing homelessness, we have families that are experiencing homelessness, and we have individuals that are in a low to moderate poverty category. Those individuals can slide off at any second with any devastating thing that could happen, typically sacrificing rent versus a medical bill versus childcare versus a car fix so they can get to work and maintain employment. So we know that New Jersey has one of the highest costs of living in the United States. I think it's in the top 5. On top of that, this is pre-pandemic stats. The pandemic has exacerbated almost every social issue that people are facing currently. And the most hardest hit population are these vulnerable populations that I am describing here. And that is now in turning where we're seeing a lot of individuals that are coming in to experiencing homelessness or at imminent risk of experiencing homelessness. At this time, currently, we're in the midst of a housing crisis. There is not enough affordable housing to go on and meet the needs. There is actually no real affordable housing that is a fair market rate right now. So anybody that is looking for housing in one of our programs, that's $1,000 for a 1-bedroom. It's very hard to find right here. So that being said, I want to throw out some maybe startling stats at you guys to kind of get a temperature of where we are right now. Atlantic County has the second highest evictions filed out of any county for the state. Currently, there is about 11,000 active evictions that are filed right now. There are 60 new evictions being filed a week. So what that means is that what we are seeing trending at the Atlantic Homeless Alliance, and the Atlantic Homeless Alliance, I shall say, is the coordinated entry for anybody that is experiencing homelessness or at imminent risk of homelessness to come into the county. So there we kind of have our one-stop shop where we can do assessments and see what anybody needs and match the most appropriate service delivery for them so that we can expedite either exiting homelessness or diverting their homelessness. So where we are right now is that since 2000, we have seen a drastic increase in, of course, the overall need of people that are presenting. What has been startling as it relates to women is that we have seen an increase of 4% of women increasing. So there had been a split before where maybe it was about 43% women versus 57% men. We are now almost 50-50 matched. We are at a 1.5% difference. We are also seeing that out of all families presenting, there are 19 overall 2-parent families. There was one family that presented as a male single household, but 65 that presented as a female head of household. We also saw that DV as a reason for experiencing homelessness has also increased. I want to say we are now, in the last year, we had 41 individuals that presented that said that their reason for experiencing homelessness was related to domestic violence. How Atlantic Homeless Alliance is trying to combat this is that we have many different program designs in Atlantic Homeless Alliance to serve some of these gaps. We have a Access to Counsel pilot program that launched, and through Access to Counsel, we have been able to serve and divert 75 individuals that have been facing eviction in the last year, and that are all Atlantic City residents. We have a diversion program specific to quickly helping an individual locate and identify resources so they didn't have to enter homelessness, and that served 110 people unduplicated so far this year. We have a COVID rapid rehousing program that has permanently housed 30 individuals that were experiencing homelessness at this time. We have a model that we also use throughout our service delivery at Jewish Family Service called Housing First. Now, through that model, it is exactly what that means. We provide housing first and then work with that individual to accept services later to stabilize out. Hi, Anne. Anne has been with us forever, and she can attest to the fact that right now, currently, we have about 150 consumers that we work with throughout the county that have been placed since we started this, and we have close to a 97% retention rate for these individuals. I will say that we also have our PATH program that John had discussed, which is to assist individuals that are transitioning from homelessness into out of homelessness that have a serious and persistent mental health issue. I am overseeing the Justice Involved Services, so we have a similar program that is very community-based to work with individuals. Most of them are experiencing homelessness, but they have some legal aspect to the help that they need. So we work with them through that justice system because we do not want them to be involved in that justice system longer than they need to be. We have a great relationship with the reentry team, which is the contracted service provider at the Atlantic County Jail. There we do reentry plans for inmates. Majority of them, women and male, that we are working with are experiencing homelessness at the time of release. So we do very warm handoffs with the Atlantic Homeless Alliance so that they can have a spot to go to, assessments done, a leg up, working to get Medicaid, working to get benefits so that we can end their homelessness as fast as possible. And most recently, we have partnered with Stockton University and Atlantic City Police Department to launch our ACT program, which is a co-responder model with the police and mental health clinicians that respond to all mental health calls that are dispatched out. So we respond to them regardless if they're housed or not, but what we knew and what we are proving at this point is that a lot of individuals are experiencing homelessness that need mental health outreach. Now, through that program, which officially had its launch in January, we've been able to link on the spot people to rehab. We've been able to link people for family reunification back to where they came from and their natural supports. And we've been able to then also link them to our wonderful providers here, like Avanzar and the Rescue Mission, so we can follow up with case management. So I will end by saying since Atlantic Homeless Alliance's inception in 2014, the stats show that we have helped nearly 8,000 women who have come through, either diverting their homelessness, ending their homelessness permanently, or reunifying them with family. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Now let's hear from Claudia.
Good afternoon, everyone. I represent Avanzar, formerly the Women's Center. In 1975, 5 founding mothers of social conscious like-mindedness decided to survey the Atlantic County community to see what the women of our community needed. And what those results were is they needed help for sexual assault. They needed support. So those women started a hotline. And then they started a shelter system that started in their homes, a safe house. And then they wrote a grant and became the first funded shelter in New Jersey. So I certainly stand on their shoulders in front of you today to represent what Atlantic County does for domestic violence victims in our area and those who visit us, because we are also aware our population changes dramatically as the weather changes, as the seasons change, and certainly as our tourist industry change. We have to ebb and flow as our populations ebb and flow. And oftentimes, the resources that are allocated to our very southern county are not responsive enough. I know my colleagues all share that experience as well. According to the National Network to End Domestic Violence is a leading cause of homelessness for women and their children. Many victims face homelessness when they flee abuse. Their experiences are confounded by economic instability, often perpetrated by the abuser. The abuser can use control tactics to isolate the survivor, to keep them away from the help they need, destroy the survivor's credit by signing up for credit cards in their names and defaulting on the bills, causing the victim to lack steady employment due to stalking, evictions from current housing due to constant police presence or damage to property, loss of identification and documentation during the journey to get safe can be a huge barrier for domestic violence victims and their children. Of course, we know domestic violence victims are not only women, but for today's conversation, we are talking about the victims who are women. The issue of domestic violence and homelessness is so connected. It's a strong relationship due to inadequate housing, not enough shelter options, evictions, discrimination, poverty. All of those factors contribute to survivors' housing instability. A lot of times it has to do with the police being called, that's not a good look for the community, that the landlord doesn't want that in their apartment. And therefore, sometimes the police are not called to help because the victim does not want to create instability for her children and herself. The lack of finances because the abuser limits their ability to work or to maintain a job successfully. Eviction is so linked to abuse. It's financial abuse. It's all about power and control and who has access to the finances, the money, when it's needed. It can also have long-term impacts on the survivor. It can impair their credit, as I mentioned, and they're not being able to access housing in any way. They don't have the history. I can tell you in Atlantic County, we currently have a 15-bed communal living shelter. Of course, we haven't been using that particular shelter during COVID, and we have housed in 2019 59 women and 44 children. In 2020, 40 women and 29 children. In 2021, 32 women and 32 children. And as of March for 2022, 14 women and 24 children. Now, the shelter days are a little bit different. For 2019, close to 3,000 shelter days. In 2020, over 3,000 shelter days. In 2021, 5,500 shelter days. And for our first quarter, 2,415 shelter days, which projects for a year, it could be close to 9,600 shelter days. That is an enormous jump in the past 3 years. And that jump has happened because our capacity has expanded because of COVID, because our funder, the Department of Children and Family, the Division on Women, have been responsive to all the problems that presented to the domestic violence population and allowed us to use efficiency motel rooms with a lot of daily wraparound treatment to house domestic violence survivors. So in the saying, if you build it, they will come, we have really experienced that. And there's no putting COVID back in the box. So we're here to say that the model for domestic violence survivors is certainly a housing first model. Gone are the treatments of the 60s where everyone experiencing the same problem is the first line of help and support for one another. In trauma work, that's not real. We need time to stabilize the victim, to create the new nuclear family, to support them in every way. And you cannot do that by leaning on someone else who's going through a trauma. Housing first is the most respectful, ethical model available to victims of trauma, with one caveat: safety. How do you provide the level of safety that emergency undisclosed protective shelter can offer? Through layers, lots of layers, through good security, through a wonderful network with area law enforcement at all levels, with the partners here at the table. We will never, unfortunately, not have a need for an emergency shelter. We read it in the newspapers way too much. The murders, the murder-suicides, the family annihilations that are all part of domestic violence. We need a 24/7 emergency shelter, and we will continue to have that. Avanzar has had that since our onset. But they don't, the victims don't have to stay for what's normal now, to have the need to stay for months at a time. 2 weeks, stabilization and safety, and then housing first, and all the continued wraparound services, the workforce programs, the child care support, all of those things. And just availability to professionals who are equipped and knowledgeable in trauma and recovery.
Thank you, Claudia, for that sobering overview. And John, we'd like to hear your perspectives now.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm John McLernan, formerly with Atlantic County Government. I was largely responsible for overseeing the Emergency Assistance Program for the county, which is the funding that's given to individuals who are profoundly low income, for rental assistance, could be for clothing, it could be for supplemental food, it could be for utility bills, it's for a plethora of different things to assist individuals in stabilizing. But it's interesting, as I was listening to the other speakers speak, I was reflecting back upon, like when I started doing this about 18 years ago, about the mistakes that I made and how I would correct them now. And it's interesting, but back when I first started, and my department head at that time, remembers all the calls he was getting from Trenton, is that I was embracing this housing first model, that everyone needs to be housed, regardless. And I didn't look at whether or not the causality of the homelessness. I just placed people in anywhere I could place them, thinking that they would self-stabilize. And that's such an erroneous perception, because if you don't have the case management and you don't have people checking on you, you're not going to do well. We need to be mindful of the fact, when I started 18 years ago on this, I worked on this kind of false premise that homelessness just happened. Like you were doing well, walking down, middle-class person working in a job, and all of a sudden you plummeted into a sense of poverty. And it doesn't happen that way. It trickles down through stages, almost to the point where you start losing the job, you start losing the family, and in all cases, invariably, in almost all cases, addiction played a real pivotal role in that. So as time marched on, I kept working with the department head and the county administrator in trying to develop programming where we really target the working poor. We have some programming, for example, that does, the SEAS program does target people who are the working poor. But if we can assist the individuals that are marginally scraping by and in jeopardy of being evicted or in jeopardy of not being able to pay their rent or their utility bills, and help them empower themselves to get a better job or to go to training, that could be much more advantageous than simply cutting a check. So I think for many years that was the answer. That was possibly the person was 6 months behind in the rent, so we just paid the rent for 6 months, and we thought magically that person would self-stabilize, and that's not the case. So I think a lot of people don't understand the complexities involved with the dynamics of homelessness. You're talking about people that are born in poverty. You're talking about individuals that may have one parent, maybe if they're lucky. The neighbor might be the parent. The grandparent may be the parent. The aunt or the uncle or the relative could be the parent. But just the lack of supervision and a lack of guidance just leads people to a sense of just reckless living and irresponsible living. And we have a responsibility of helping those individuals. So, about 2.5 years ago, before COVID struck, a group of us from Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous developed a volunteer group. We went out in the streets every week into the blighted areas of Atlantic City, trying to connect individuals to services. We had access to Medicaid. We had access to about 6 or 7 of the facilities that would accept these individuals. And the sad part is we were able to get people in the cab to get there at 9 o'clock at night, but they didn't make it to the facility because the power of the drug was much more powerful and brought them back to a bag of dope. So it was disappointing. The children that we met, or I met throughout my time and tenure in Atlantic County, it's heartbreaking. You got single mothers that are raising children and the father's missing in action. How do we ask a mother with 6 children to get a full-time job and at the same time raise her children, without adequate child care? So there's a multitude of different barriers that come along in addition to just cutting checks for people. And I think sometimes in the emergency assistance world that was seen as the partial answer. If we give you enough money, in fact, you will do better. I was telling John earlier in the presentation that when I spent a lot of time up in New York City working with the Commissioner of Homeless Services, and he made a really remarkable comment to me a while back about that the city made a mistake in that making life for homeless men in the shelters simply too comfortable. They were able to get up at 10 o'clock in the morning, have their donut and cup of coffee, and go back to sleep and not do anything to work for wellness. So right before I left county government, I met with the department head and the county administrator to come up with federal funds that the county received about a staggered type of program where people will incentivize people to go to work or take a class or do something in order to help themselves stabilize. And if they buy into that program, then we'll reward them financially rather than just cutting a check and hoping for the best. So I think that more stratified approach might work. I'm not around anymore working for county government to execute the plan, but I think it has strong merit based upon some of the research that I've read. But in the years that I've been doing this, it's interesting. I look up at Ann Thorsen, and I remember her also well. Ann was, by the way, the author of the single point of entry in Atlantic County. She put the entire concept together. And, we all admire her so much. But to do that, she developed rules and regulations and policy, There were rules. People were eligible based upon X, Y, Z. They had to do something they had to involve themselves in some capacity in order to receive a benefit. And I think that's really the strategy to take today, is that we have to incentivize people and reward them if they're taking the step in the right direction to help themselves, and whatever that may be. Because I'm in New York a lot for other different reasons now, and I just see the disproportionate amount of homelessness that just is on the streets, and it's staggering. In Atlantic City, when you go into any of the casino properties, you'll see them along Atlantic Avenue and Pacific Avenue, And I know all of them. And then I worked for the jail for 10 years, and it just reinforced what I knew for, I guess, the mistakes I made in the beginning in county government, is that, 80% of all those individuals in the jail were opioid dependent. So if you don't look at addiction as the primary causation or causality for homelessness, I think you're seeing things in a delusional perspective, We really need to look at chemical dependency and domestic violence, of course. Very quickly to what Claudia was saying is that the regulations and what the county follows for domestic violence individuals coming into us is that we do roll out the red carpeting for them, which I think is really impressive. The governor made it very, very clear that any individual who is a victim of domestic violence does not have to undergo the endurance of proving to us that they've been a victim of domestic violence. Just their statement alone somewhat verifies that. And we contact Avizar to make sure that they speak to them and they do a further assessment. They call us back and say, yes, I do believe this person was a domestic violence victim, and then we help them as well. We had 76 individuals last year that reported to be domestic violence that came in for public assistance. But the fact is that to ignore domestic violence would be a travesty of justice for the people that have to endure that level of pain. And now I know we're on the cusp of working much more with human trafficking, which is another whole complex area, which is way beyond my scope of comprehension. I'd like to learn much more about it. But in essence, I think if we were able to look at the working poor and try to make their life better, then we could statistically reduce the number of people who are living in very, very, very ultra-low income. Specifically in general assistance, you have to make less than $185 a month in order to get emergency assistance. That's poverty level. So it's almost like we're enforcing the poverty level in order to get the benefit. So why don't we look at rewarding people who are trying to help themselves by working, and even though they're not making enough money, partially subsidize them. But the system doesn't operate that way. The system operates that if they have nothing, then you can help them. If they make something, then they hurt themselves. So I think if we can make those changes in regulations, I think that hopefully we'll be able to intercede a lot faster and maybe increase the quality of life of those persons. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We called this discussion "The Many Faces of Homeless Women," and I think you've heard from our excellent opening here that it is a complex, challenging problem with many facets and many working parts to deal with. We must never forget, though, that when we talk about homeless, you're going to talk about programs, facts, statistics, but we should never forget that we are talking about human beings who are deserving of respect and dignity. And Kay has offered to relay a couple of the human stories she's encountered over time. I'm eager to get to my questions, but we're going to take a few moments. Kay, would you tell us one or two stories that you've encountered about how this affects real people?
Certainly, thank you. First, I'm sorry that Helene could not be with us. She has lived experience and was going to tell her story. And so in her stead, I'll try to bring a little bit of humanity to it. The Atlantic City Rescue Mission, we have our Family Life Center, which houses moms and children, and then our Women's Ministry Department, which is from ages 18 and above. And you think age 18, okay, how about the day of your 18th birthday? This is one young lady's story. In the early 90s, we had a mom, I'll call her Allie, and she came to us for shelter with her 3 young children. They'd been living with Allie's mother, and Allie's mother passed away. The children's father was incarcerated, and Allie didn't have any place to go. So she came to the Atlantic City Rescue Mission. They stayed at our shelter for a few months, and they were able to secure housing as they had the TANF benefit that John spoke about, and a temporary rental assistance was made available to them. But Allie suffered, she was HIV positive. And about a year or so after they moved into their housing, Allie succumbed to some complications of AIDS and she passed away. The children were separated, and each one of them went to live with a family member of their father. And the thought was, he's getting out of jail soon, he's going to come, he's going to reunite his family, he's going to be the dad. That didn't happen He had already been in a relationship with another woman, and when he was released, he went to live with her. And the children all remained in the houses with their foster families. So the oldest daughter lived down in North Carolina with a great aunt. Her 18th birthday, she was given $200, told good luck, and was asked to leave. She showed up on our doorstep that same day. And this is what she said to us. She said she remembered being with us as a child, and she knew she'd be safe, that this was a safe place that she could go. We were able to share with her some memories about her mom and their time with us, and she laughed and she cried. She said her father's family didn't really know her mom, so she never really had those stories and that connection. We were able to provide temporary shelter for her, and then we got her connected with the Covenant House, which is here in Atlantic City and is set up to help young adults ages 18 to 21. There they had more services that were appropriate for her and for her age. She'd frequently stop in to see us, and actually she still calls us every once in a while now. At this time, she and her brother and sister are all adults, and they have a relationship with each other again. And that's just it's just one little story. So what I've found happens over and over again is that women who come to us have been the caretaker for somebody, and that somebody ends up in a nursing home or they pass away. A lot of times they're living in senior housing, and once the senior who held the lease passed away, now the person who was caring for them needs to move unless they are disabled or a senior themselves and can get and can transition into that housing. This is a different story. This woman who came to us in her 50s, I'm going to call her Jane. So for her entire life, Jane and her sister lived with their parents. Nice, quiet little family in a nice, quiet little house. Her mother passed away, and she and her sister were left to care for their father, who was obese. One day, her father fell, and the two girls could not get him up. They had to call the EMTs. And when the workers arrived, they saw that it really was not a plan for these two women to try to take care of their dad any longer. He ended up hospitalized and then put into a nursing home. Her sister had some disabling conditions and had the SSI benefit, which is a supplement to Social Security. And she was able to get placed into a residential facility, a boarding home where she could live. But Jane had no place to go, and so she came to us. Jane only had part-time jobs her whole life, so she's what John is talking about, those who fall into a poverty level where they can't afford to live on their own and they need some assistance. Jane stayed with us, continued with her job, saved money. She's on the housing priority list, hoping to get a voucher for housing assistance that she can afford. But these are the kinds of people that we see every day, people that you'll walk past on the street and not know what their struggle is. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kay. And I think, anyone who works in this field are exposed to so much sadness and so much, dark stories, and they deserve so much credit for doing this work, and we really appreciate everything you all have done. So let me get to a few questions. We're going to throw it out. If you want to comment on it, just raise your hand and we'll get to whoever wants to, and we'll try to get through a few of these as much as possible. And if you have questions from the audience, please write them neatly on the index cards. And we have helpers who will go around, collect them, and we'll get to a few before we wrap this up. So let's start out. How do you all quantify the extent of homelessness affecting women right now in this region. Do the numbers fluctuate year to year, or is it kind of a consistent level because of the factors at play?
If
Go
you're
ahead,
looking
John.
at the, I did some comparable analysis of the last 3 years. They are pretty consistent, John, across the board. I mean, looking at, we had 1,240 people in 2021 receive services from us from housing, whether that be mostly in terms of rent or rental assistance. But of the 1,240, 275 were single women. There was surprisingly 301 that were heads of households, and doesn't specify in him as the gender with the home management information system, but of the 301 individuals, there was the heads of households that were homeless, and DCP&P was involved in 78 of those individuals. It's important to mention that DCPP does not see homelessness as a reason to open a case. That's very important. But what is relevant is when you make a discovery and you knock on the door where case management comes into play and you see a mother stepping on a syringe or kids stepping on a syringe, is when you have to contact the organization. And the difficult part, of course, there, John, is trying to convince the parent you're doing this because you want her to get better and be a better mother but she sees it, of course, as you as the enemy oftentimes and reacts strongly. But to answer your question in terms of the quantification, there are 1,240 individuals, and 275 were single women, and 301 were heads of households in 2001 that received benefits from us for housing, for food, for utility assistance, and supplemental clothing.
Anyone else?
Yes, please. So for the Atlantic City Rescue Mission, during this time of the pandemic, we operated in a diminished capacity in order to be able to comply with social distancing and such. So our numbers for shelter went down, but we sheltered those individuals in place for longer periods of time. What didn't go down was the need for food. The Atlantic City Rescue Mission provides breakfast and dinner every day to anybody in the community who's hungry, and we also distribute food baskets. Those numbers tripled and even more during this last period of time. Thank you.
And for lack of being redundant, because I believe I mentioned this earlier, for our database, and I did some analysis in HIMIS, which we all utilize as the Homeless Management Information System, we did see an increase in the amount of women that were presenting at Atlantic Homeless Alliance in need of support. So again, it sounds insignificant to say a 4% increased need, but when you compare that to the bigger number, it is quite significant.
And like my colleague, not wanting to be redundant, because I think I shared how drastically the numbers have gone up during COVID, that the need is there, and if you make services available, you will be able to protect more families from violence.
Thank you. So I'm going to break some news here. We have a Stockton poll that the Hughes Center has not yet released, but in this statewide poll, we asked New Jersey residents to estimate how much of a problem they think homelessness is in their communities. 4 out of 10, the biggest group of them, said it was not a problem at all. And more than a third, 35%, said it's only a minor problem. Do our panelists agree with that assessment? And if not, are we doing enough job educating the public?
I'd like to jump in quickly, not really to say a lot, but just to say that homelessness is only a problem when it's a problem of aesthetics in a community. And if your community can see it, it becomes a problem. I think both people experiencing homelessness themselves know that and take good care in, for the most part, keeping their presence on the outskirts. And then you have, as I'm sure my colleagues on both sides of me know, you also have pockets of homelessness in certain communities that are somehow allowed to thrive. And, on one hand, you could say that's altruistic and they have a right to be somewhere And if they don't want to come in, that's where they can be. But yet, I know in the helping profession, we strive for people to have, you know, a self-determination, but also integrity of living. So it's a little tough.
John, there's a real life situation. I'll make it brief, I promise. Just last year, there was a prominent CEO who just happens to be in recovery from alcohol and other drugs that wanted to expand and use some of the private and public money that was available coming down from COVID to open up a transitional housing facility near the Bader Field area. So site approval was already granted. I mean, we were making tremendous progress. There was a Superior Court judge that stepped in to also help, that was also involved with alcohol and other drugs and helping people with alcohol and drugs. There was a lot of momentum going place, but it was killed because the concept was that the people in Chelsea Heights might be offended by having homeless people in their area. So when you try to develop something, those blockades come up very, very quickly. I mean, very quickly. I was telling a couple of people right before we got on today that there was a piece in the New York Times on the people living on the Upper East Side that were giving millions of dollars to shelters on the Lower East Side of Manhattan to help the homeless. They're very passionate about that. And when, during COVID, the mayor at that time had to use some of the vacant hotels to place homeless people in. So when those hotels were adjacent in proximity to their homes, they all lawyered up, and they all got public relations people to block the change. So it's interesting. We can write the check and send the money, but yet when we try to help people in our own neighborhood, it's shut down. So there is tremendous opposition to the concept. It's just simply not in my town.
I'd just like to add to that, just a little bit of a caveat, that shelters, as wonderful as they could be, are still somewhat of a form of institutionalization. And that's why the housing model, the Housing First model, is such a breath of fresh air, because it really pinpoints the dignity that everybody deserves. I mean, I used to work at a developmental center, and there were many, many individuals who lived there as their life and were not so profoundly impacted that was necessitated, but that's where the community wanted them. So I think we have to stay on course and support people to be able to thrive independently as best they can in quality living arrangements.
I agree with both of my colleagues over here. John knows that we have experienced NIMBY, not in my backyard, with shared clients across many different program designs that we've dealt with. I also wonder, this is a student poll, if some of the students, no offensive ages of students, but if they have become desensitized to homelessness in itself, which might be why they don't necessarily perceive it as their problem or a problem to bear. Some people think that individuals choose to be homeless, or this is just a drug addict, or et cetera, and so it's not necessarily a problem in itself. You know, people walk past individuals experiencing homelessness in Philadelphia on the streets everywhere. Do you stop and look at them? Do we assess, or do we just keep moving?
It's only a problem if it happens to me, right?
Correct.
Or your neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
So I've noticed a couple of things. One, a lot of the individuals who are standing outside panhandling or with signs are not necessarily homeless. They are a lot of time the working poor. Sometimes they are individuals with addictions to drugs, alcohol, or gambling here in the city, and they're just seeking more money to support those habits. Do these polls and the individuals who are taking them consider them when they're thinking about homelessness? But on the other side, there are a number of people who are without a permanent address, and they are couch surfing. They're sleeping with this friend this night and that friend that night. They might have a small source of income where they can afford a motel for a few nights each month. And those individuals, on the other hand, do not get considered as homeless when, in fact, they're on the verge or they technically are homeless.
The invisible.
Invisible.
Thank you. I'll remind those in the audience here, if you do have any questions, please write them on index cards, pass them to our helpers who are circulating, and We'll save time for you. But for now, a large percentage of homeless women are mothers with dependent children. So often, this problem is rightly characterized as family homelessness. What kind of impacts are you seeing on these children, and how does it affect the mother to not be able to provide a roof over the children's heads? How is it affecting the children?
And the nice answer, and the truthful answer to that, John, is that all of us sitting at this table drop what we're doing when particularly Christine, when she and I were working nighttime with the COVID cases, remember?
Yes.
And the families that we had that were homeless and where we're going to place them. And it's amazing, like there's a lot, when you say dependent children, the whole complexion changes completely. Your whole line of thinking, the regulations go out the window, and you just grant waivers which not even are waiverable. You just find a way to help these kids. And so it's interesting, it's nice to see that type of passion. And Christine and I used to get these phone calls at 9 o'clock at night from the hospital, for example, that someone was COVID positive. And when there was children involved, I mean, I'm telling you, there was a lot of passion placed in placing them in areas that were better locations, if you will, safer locations, if you will. So, and a lot of good follow-up. So children, fortunately, get a lot of care. The DCP&P is contacted only, not in a punitive way, but only to assist us in making sure that children are going to school and that the children have enough clothing, so that they're reaching out to the guidance counselors in the schools and the kindergarten teachers and first grader teachers to make sure that the kids are well dressed or have enough clothing. So it's completely different. When you say kids, like we just all think a different way.
I do think as a system, we do our best, and we do our best for children. But homelessness itself is an adverse childhood experience and causes just really inevitable complications to their growth, their development, and what they may or may not be able to achieve in their own lives. So I think it is important that we pull out all the stops, and we understand, when John said DCP&P doesn't respond to homelessness as necessarily an issue for intervention, that could be because they're at a shelter. If they're at our shelter, they feel they're protected, they're nurtured, they're met with their daily needs. But still, that family needs all the support and advocacy they can get to be rehoused in a safe way.
The only difference to that, Claudia, was when you have a family that, say, has been chronically homeless for the 4th time, and you find out for the first 3 times the mother was opioid dependent, and bringing individuals into the property, because we used to go out like 8, 9 o'clock at night to check on these individuals in these hotels. That was like the 3rd or 4th episode of homelessness, and there was still dependent children in the household. We did look at shelters, though, only because of the monitoring purposes, Claudia, to ensure that the mother was keeping the children safe. But I think that was the only time. But you're right. Initially, we shied away from shelters. Right. But towards the end, if there was chronicity with returns to addiction, it was a different mindset.
And I think Claudia said something that is impactful, and why probably we all have such passion and wraparound when children are involved is the generational trauma that exists, and then therefore can extend into generational homelessness. So we really understand how we can address that trauma. I would say that I'm very big on being trauma informed and having a staff that is trauma informed, so that way we can best handle these cases and how to deal with them and how to work through some of the barriers to being able to be rehoused. We also advocate a lot with the school systems. If we have to relocate somebody, that McKinney-Vento Act, that way children do not have to be disrupted from their education, can remain in the same school system, and it's advocacy with mom, it's advocacy if they allow us to speak to the school, et cetera. So.
And I'd just like to comment on the disproportionate responsibility to keep the children housed placed on the mother.
Again, 1 male, 65 female.
Yeah.
So having worked in the Family Life Center, I did see that being homeless as a school-age child can be difficult. And as was said, there is the McKinney-Vento program, and what that does is it provides a liaison at the various schools who will be an assistant to help the child to remain in the school where they had previously been enrolled when they're in a temporary homeless situation. That way, they have the same teacher, their education's not disrupted, they have the same classmates. There's one problem in that, and that is that kids can be really cruel. And when this child now is showing up in an Uber or a small bus, instead of their normal means of transportation, you've got kids who will whisper, you've got kids who will tease, and that can be a really difficult situation on them, especially for children who've already experienced other traumas and even the trauma of homelessness itself. However, for them living in the shelter, they're typically pretty happy, other than when they have to share a bedroom with their brother or sister. Usually they'll make friends with other kids who are presently at the shelter, and the structure benefits them. There's a time to wake up. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner are served at the same time every day. There's a time to do homework. There's a curfew, and there's a bedtime. And the moms, especially of the younger kids, once they've moved out, if they call us back, that's always what they say. Oh, thank you, my kid's still on that schedule. And so there are things that can benefit, because typically prior to this family coming into the shelter, there was some serious disruption in their lives. And so that's part of what we're able to do at the Atlantic City Rescue Mission in our Family Life Center, have that safe place. The moms, they tend to do one thing or another. They either fight, which makes them fully motivated to try every avenue to get themselves and their children back on their feet, or they collapse and they freeze, and they need somebody to hold their hand and show them what's the next steps that you have to take to bring health and wholeness back to your family.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question. We'll go to the audience questions if you're ready to bring them up. I wanted to ask, have you heard any creative approach, or do you know of any solutions that are working? We've heard a couple examples of this already in your comments, so I'll throw an add-on question. If you could push one policy solution, if there's one policy you would like to see enacted, what would it be? So either a program you know is making a difference, or what policy would you promote? John, go ahead.
I would take our welfare emergency assistance program, and rather than having a dichotomous decision like you're eligible, not eligible, like if you earn more than $185 a month, you get nothing. If you earn $183 a month, you can get a lot of things. So I would stratify that and put that make that incremental. A little bit analogous to the food stamp program. The more you make, the less you get. So we're giving something to people that are trying and struggling to get ahead. I think we really need to focus on the working poor, because it's a very large segment of our population here, but the regulations don't address it under emergency assistance. So yes, it would be something comparable, John, to the food stamp program, which if you make more, you get less. If you make less, you make more. So I just think that, and we need to incentivize people, not just cutting checks to people, but a little bit like that, and Bertie's sitting in the front row, she's aware of the program I'm talking about giving $1,000 to a person to complete a class, another $1,000 for a person that actually gets the job, another $1,000 for the person to help them pay their rent. So we incentivize them as they go along the process to keep them rolling and motivated, because it's just not cutting a check and saying, I hope you do well, call me back in 6 months and give me an update. So yes, I would see that regulation change, John, if I had the power to do that.
I'm going to keep my answer simple. I'm going to say that we need housing. So what John is saying is yes, I agree with that. But if we don't have anywhere to put these people once they are doing well or stabilized, what are we doing with them? We do not have enough affordable housing in the state. We are shy of 200,000 affordable housing units right now. I mean, we can wrap individuals in case management programs. We have that type of programming. That's available, but where are we going with them?
So for the Atlantic City Rescue Mission, as a Christian organization, the Bible has been a truth and a guidance for thousands of years. We'd say the best is to be the immediate help that you can be, and then to link the person with some ongoing support, a church family, case management that can follow through. Psalm 68:6 reads, God sets the solitary in families. He brings out those who are bound into prosperity. For us, we will choose to serve the Lord and to trust him.
The National Network to End Domestic Violence recommends job protections, fair pay, supportive child care, tax credits, individual development accounts, workforce development programs.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience, and I'll ask the panelists, just kind of wave or raise your hand before you start speaking so our technical crew has your microphone on. So what can people who do not typically work with this population do to help?
Volunteer at wonderful organizations that are sitting next to me, and humanize individuals when you see them that are experiencing homelessness. I think that that goes a long way. Take notice, smile, they're people, acknowledge them. Having talked through so many individuals and that have experienced homelessness, something that comes back all the time is they don't feel seen, human, heard, anything. So really acknowledging people, seeing what's in front of them.
Vote.
Okay, so here's someone who said they've experienced homelessness here in Atlantic County, and there are challenges for mothers who have young children and a teenager. And what options do you have if you are not able to stay at the rescue mission?
I can answer that, John. We utilize 2 out-of-county shelters, which is something we don't like to do. With the family that comes to you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they're probably going right to the rescue mission if there's availability. But if there's not and there's backlog, there's 2 other shelters, one in Gloucester and one in Camden County we typically use all the time. So they've got to be housed right away, and we want a facility that works with children and understands that, what children are like. So we do have out-of-county shelters that we use all the time. But what we try to do is be mindful of the fact that every county is responsible for their own homeless, and we don't ship people to Newark, and we're asking Newark not to ship people to us. So the same concept would be for these out-of-county shelters, and so we only do that when there's no availability at the rescue mission.
If I can answer, please. Yes, that is an issue and a huge gap. Our Family Life Center can house mothers and children, but not teenage boys. Age 13 is the cutoff, as then they become young men. And so there used to be a juveniles in need shelter, GINS, just offshore from here that could be utilized for that young man while his family were homeless. Covenant House only takes ages 18 to 21. And so there's a gap for young men who are ages 13 to 18. And it does need to be addressed, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a systemic issue that really needs to be addressed. The domestic violence population, we keep our families together and keep even the young men with their mothers until the age of 18.
So in that case, John, what would happen at 5 o'clock at night is that family would go to a hotel. Right. And I'm in the minority opinion on this, but I'm not a fan of hotels. I don't believe they function well. Because they're not supervised, and I don't want. I just don't want damage and chaos to be occurring, and then they're going to get tossed out of that facility, and then without supervision. So I don't think it serves a purpose other than putting a roof over their head. So I would prefer some level of structured environment initially to ensure that they're doing well. but you can't always get that. So at 5 o'clock at night, are you going to have the person sleep under the boardwalk? Are you going to have the person in a hotel? Obviously, the answer is you put the person in a hotel.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question because you raise an interesting point about the counties taking care of their own, not shipping people out to them. As a reporter, when I covered this issue for the Atlantic City Press, I always heard complaints from elected officials mainly that other counties were shipping their homeless to Atlantic City because they knew they would be taken care of and there were services. Is there any evidence of that? Is that true?
If you talk to the deputy warden and the warden of the county jail, they'll tell you that the homeless in the jail call us the Disney World of the state. Because we have a lot of services, and we had more when Gene Webster's Kitchen was open, for example, and we have an ample number of food banks. The shelter has a very liberal admissions policy, and we have a shelter in Atlantic County, and other counties don't have a shelter. So there is more available services here, and we also have a very liberal policy with emergency assistance. I mean, we're pretty liberal in approving cases, particularly initially. Unless there's a 5-year cap as per regulation, but that's the reason why. So
We also have the casinos and the bus stations
it's a popular
that
place,
people
too.
can
Yeah.
find shelter in.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say that people experiencing homelessness are migrant, so, going from a place to a place depending on seasons. We get a busy season here for those experiencing homelessness. I can tell you firsthand, we've had people present from other counties. How'd you get here? I was put on a bus. I don't know, we really will see that. And we're like, okay, let's find and do some digging. And then, we have a program called TA, Traveler's Assistance. And as long as we can verify that somebody's on the other end, the receiving line, we go right back because John can tell you if somebody's coming from another county, they are not entitled to benefits in this county.
I'm sure
And I
what
think
John refers to as a liberal policy, many would refer to as a humane policy.
It's not-
Anyone else on that question?
It's not just limited to New Jersey, to our other counties in New Jersey. We sometimes see that happen from Philadelphia, from Maryland, from Delaware. It can be from a family who's struggling with an adult with a mental health issue, and it used to be called bus therapy. But our approach is we do an assessment, we try to provide all the help we can, and as my colleague said, if they're not grounded in the community, it's going to be much more difficult for them, much more difficult. And that's not to say, I mean, we have always had a very large tourist population, and that's when, if housing is at its worst, it's going to be during tourist season.
So the Atlantic City Rescue Mission, we are here to serve individuals whose homelessness originated in Atlantic County. However, we do provide emergency courtesy stays for those who either find themselves stranded here or are in a transient situation. Many of the people that we've seen come through, not so much the bus therapy as we had seen many years ago, but a lot of people come seeking employment. A lot of people come because they can stay with a friend or a family member, and that doesn't work out, and they end up, coming to our doors for help.
We have some really interesting questions here. What do you do or can you do about homeless people who refuse to accept help?
Or what, John?
That's my specialty.
For homeless people who refuse to accept help, what can or do you do about it?
Yeah,
Yes, Christine.
I think, a lot of us at this table have worked, so that's kind of where you fall into this chronic homeless subcategory of individuals, and I would say we probably all know them here. There are a lot of the same individuals. We don't quit. We are very persistent in our outreach efforts. That's why we have this program designs that we have at JFS, that we have clinicians, we work with them, we do motivational interviewing, we pull out all the stops, we buy them coffee, we sit, we build rapport. Individuals that are experiencing homelessness, especially those that are chronically homeless, the majority of them have some form of mental health issue and or substance use issue. That means that they're also probably experienced trauma or multiple traumas and are untrusting of individuals and of authority figures, if you will, and help. So it's a process. We don't quit. Some of our cases and consumers that we currently have worked with were those people and have been housed now for 15 years, maintaining their housing. So it happens. It's just not immediate.
Yes, I agree completely with Christine. Building those relationships, just like I said, don't promise something that you're not going to be able to deliver. Show up when you say you're going to show up. Help them as best as you can, and when you can't, know who it is who can, and do that warm handoff. Make sure that they get to that next level of help that they need.
I think it's a delicate balance of client self-determination and repairing self-esteem and self-worth to say what they deserve, how they deserve to live, and what kind of support they deserve as human beings.
So sometimes, John, we can use leverage. For example, there's a 5-year cap on benefits. You know, President Clinton back in '96 put a cap on the number of months that a person can receive benefits. So it's 60 months and/or 5 years. So the 5-year cap can be extended. So if a person, for example, who's chronically homeless won't participate, you can sometimes negotiate and say, if I extend your housing just for 2 more months, would you agree to go to a partial daycare program? Would you agree to take medication? Would you agree to see a psychiatrist? Would you agree, to enroll in work readiness program in exchange for us housing you a little bit longer? And that sometimes works. I mean, because they see that is the most important. Obviously, it's one of the most important things in their life. That's worked on occasion, not all the time, but it's worth a shot. And it's like, as Christine and Claudia were saying, the rapport building is enormously important. If that relationship's established and the person trusts you, you can garnish 500% more in terms of benefit and participation.
To add to your leverage that you were speaking of, we know that there's a term called policing homelessness. So individuals that are experiencing homelessness often have nuisance tickets or summons that they're waiting for because of public intoxication or urinating, whatever, the gamut of things. So what we've chosen to do with our partnership with Atlantic City PD and Stockton University is to partner with the ACPD. So it's not always seen as enforcement, but we're trying to divert people out of the criminal justice system as much as possible. So we can present, you can do this, you can work with social services, as opposed of ending up X, Y, and Z incarcerated or in jail and having that record, which then will lead to having more struggles obtaining housing or employment, et cetera.
We have time for 1 or 2 more. I'm just going to warn the panel that in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you for a very brief summary or concluding statement.
The lightning round, I think.
So at least I gave you one. Have you ever encountered a situation where it challenges your morals or ethics or your sense of values, and how do you deal with it?
People that have assaulted other individuals, that would probably be my most ethical dilemma. Men that have come in and have assaulted people, and you wonder whether or not that they're not worthy of housing, but if they fit the regulations you actually are required to, because they could just take us to court and win the case. But the point is, that's hard sometimes when you see so much battering taking place. There's a person that works works with trafficking and wanted me to work with the men that batter those women, and I couldn't, John. I just couldn't work with that group. I mean, because it's just so despicable what they're doing to these women. But the point is that I would have a hard time going the extra effort, I think, in those situations. I really would. I would probably end up housing them, but reluctantly.
Yes, go ahead.
So I say human beings are complicated. Life's messy, and none of us are going to get through it without making some mistakes. The unfortunate thing is that for some people, those mistakes are more costly when they don't have sufficient financial means or they don't have a support system that's available to them. Desperate people do desperate things, and we've seen that happen over and over again. How we treat them, what we're able to provide to them, will make a difference in their lives.
I'm going to go back to the children scope. Every time that there's a child involved, it doesn't necessarily always result in a situation in where I'm questioning my morals or ethics, but I do feel the need to react very strongly. John and I have worked again together on many of those cases, and sometimes it's hard to wrap your brain around some of the instances that you find out about, and sometimes it's very difficult to wrap your head around some of the responses that have occurred because you reported those instances that have happened, and you want to continue to kind of monitor, even though there may be outside of the scope of the work that we're actually doing. So that could be where you kind of teeter off outside of your morals and values.
See, John, under our regulations, a person convicted of pedophilia is entitled to housing, although if you sell, there's a possession or controlled dangerous substance, and for distribution, you're barred from receiving public assistance. So there's some disparity in terms of eligibility for services. But that would be another good example, because when you know a person is particularly like a tier 1, which is the highest tier in terms of the probability of recidivism, and repeating the same behaviors, you still have to house them, but you have to go through an exhaustive search to make sure everyone's notified, schools are notified, and you try to put the person as far, far away, and then at the same time you ask them to make sure you go to your job training course. And they can't get to the job training course because the bus doesn't run by where we put them. We put them 20 miles away, but frankly, if you're looking to do that again, you can certainly find it. So that's another group that you always think, what am I doing to make sure that this behavior doesn't happen again? Yeah.
For all the young social workers out there, because Stockton is a wonderful school of social work, my values have no place in the work I do.
All right, let's try to squeeze in one more if we can answer this one really quickly. There are a lot of vacant houses out there. A lot of houses in Atlantic County have been foreclosed. Is there any way we can fix them up and use them to house the homeless?
We tried. I told you the one story that we tried with the transitional housing. We tried to use another facility that was an empty church in Atlantic City, lobbied strenuously with powerful people to get that done, and other powerful people knocked it down. So it's interesting, we complain about the lack of services, but again, when you operationalize a plan to do the service, if it's in the wrong neighborhood, John, the plan is dead on arrival. No, it just doesn't have a chance. I mean, there are many ideas that we tried to foster. There was a lot of money coming from the American Rescue Plan from Washington to the states and counties, that they had discretionary funds to do this. And this is what we were planning to do with it. We wanted to actually have a COVID facility, you know, where like 14 people could be housed who were COVID, because at that time that was really a rampant situation. Christine and I got very involved in all that. So the point being is that when you come up with a plan and you find these empty buildings, you think it would be an easy sell, but the council person in that district opposes it, and that carries a lot of weight.
Right.
So for the Atlantic City Rescue Mission, we are affiliated with a program called Enfront that is a transitional housing for veterans. And we would love to be able to do that women's house, family house. That would be incredible. But we rely on donations. And there's an unfortunate stigma. There's the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. I don't know. You know, we'll see those commercials on television, and not that I wouldn't support someplace like St. Jude's or the Humane Society, but you'll see, they'll say every time, they don't deserve this. The children don't deserve to be ill. The dogs don't deserve to be out in the cold. But try that same thing with an adult who is homeless. You're going to get a whole different idea. Oh, they caused their homelessness. They did this, they did that. You know, if the churches would do what they're called to do and open up and serve the poor, if the people would come and donate to places like the Rescue Mission that have been providing these services, we'd be able to expand. we would want to expand. It would be a blessing and a hope for the future. Thanks.
Christine.
I would say that we can't discuss the abandoned buildings and the infrastructure of Atlantic City locally unless we talk about the gentrification that is happening. So we do have developers, we do have people out there that are allowed, if you will, to build, but how many of those developers are going to put in a couple affordable housing units? Are they going to be able to do that with this gentrification? So I don't know of any developers recently that are saying, oh, let me buy this building and make it all subsidized units. I don't know of anybody that is going for the gentrification of Atlantic City that they would want that smack in the middle of the Orange Loop. No offense to the Orange Loop. But, so you have to think about both sides of those things.
And the nice part is the Mount Holly decision is finally impacting all the municipalities now in New Jersey. So those towns in Atlantic County that tried to try to sell that responsibility to another town have lost those cases in court. So all towns, all 23 towns must have set aside for low-income housing. So it took 15 years to happen, but it is happening now, John.
All right, Claudia, want to give you a shot if you want to say anything here?
I would just say that, to rest social issues on just social service providers is just such a small fraction of the power that is needed to solve these problems. And, I think you have so many years up here of work, and I think we can only do what we can do. We need everybody else. We need you to vote. We need our legislators. We need everybody. We need to change systemic issues. We need to, just look at our panel. It's kind of not diverse.
Good point.
We are going to try to keep this to within our time frame. And so our final round here, and I'm going to start with John, the reverse of how we started our first statements. If you can very briefly give us what would you say is your takeaway for today? What is the main point you want us to take away from this panel?
Please have legislators consider targeting the working poor. I think that's such a valuable population that we just miss and overlook by years and years of just using regulations to only work with solely dirt poor, impoverished people. And I think if we were able to help people who are struggling and working poor, we could prevent them from falling into that and falling deeper into poverty.
Claudia.
I'm super proud to be part of an Atlantic County social service team. And I think I've been working in social service for over 35 years, and I've been to a lot of other places, other counties, and the partnerships are not as strong. They can be very contentious. And I'd just like to tell the community that, there's a strong team ready to keep fighting and keep doing it every day. And I can't say enough about my colleagues and their service programs, and we're here, and with your help, we can do more.
Christine.
Back at you, Claudia. I'll also say that we need more of us. We need more social workers. We need more people calling to arms, if you will, to come in and assist us and do this work. It's important work. It's policy work. It's our livelihood. It's where we live. We need more of it, and we need more housing. Of course, I will say that over and over again. And that people experiencing homelessness, I think my takeaway big was that it's not a perceived bigger issue, and it is a huge issue because look around, our numbers are increasing, the needs are increasing. It's going to continue to trend upward this way because, as Claudia had said earlier, you cannot unpack the pandemic and what that pandemic has done. So join us.
Thank you.
I agree with all of my colleagues, absolutely. And I would just like to say that we all need to care, and we all need to work together to help to solve some of these issues. I'd just like to leave with a quote from Mother Teresa that I've always loved. She said, I can do no great things, but I can do small things with great love. And that's the approach, if each of us took, would make every situation better. Thank you.
Before we break, I want to let you know that there are programs in the back of the room, if you didn't get one, that list all these wonderful panelists. Please take one. This discussion was recorded, and it will be archived on the Hughes Center's website, www.stockton.edu/Hughes Center. And if anyone couldn't tune in or make it today, it'll be there for future viewing. And I want to thank our panelists. They were terrific, and this was really informative and I think very useful. Let's hear it for our panel. Thank you all, and good evening.